Alongside me for this one, we've got Adam Crafton. We've also got a Manchester United writer, Laurie Whitwell, and our German football writer, Raphael Honigstein. Laurie, let's get into this. Old Trafford last night. You even managed to record your podcast, Talk of the Devils. What was the reaction last night from the fans anyway, especially as Manchester United were eliminated from the Champions League?
We always try and record in Old Trafford if we can, all together, really capture the atmosphere and the mood. Long before the final whistle, it was clear that United were going out of Europe entirely. That there was no sign of a comeback against a pretty functional Bayern team that were probably playing in second gear. Fans sort of stayed with United to near the end, but then when Copenhagen had won their game, clearly the Champions League progress was over and people left, and so it was pretty flat. In fact, the atmosphere never really picked up too much throughout the whole game. I think people didn't really go into it with any great expectation that United could mount a kind of unexpected comeback at the last and sneak through. Pretty deflating evening all round, and the most damning thing perhaps that it was expected. This was what people thought would happen going into the game. Yeah,
Crafton, injuries again. Maguire, Shaw, big injuries. And do you sort of echo that? Did you go into that match thinking probably not going to get anything out of this? Or did you have that quiet sort of fan optimism that, do you know what, we could turn this around? Manchester United, Bayern Munich, it's always a lovely little draw, isn't it?
I think with Manchester United at the moment, people keep saying they're inconsistent, but I don't think they are. Like, their performances are consistently bad, right? In pretty much every game this season, apart from one Carabao Cup game against Crystal Palace's reserve team, the performances are bad. Like, that's the consistent thing. So you're kind of relying on moments or mistakes by the opposition, as you saw maybe with Chelsea last week, where people got very excited because United beat Chelsea, but actually then you look at the pattern of Chelsea's other games, and we spoke about them yesterday, and there's just very little to give real encouragement. So people go into Sunday at Anfield saying anything can happen because it's Manchester United against Liverpool at Anfield, and actually, I think we all know what's going to happen, right? We know the kind of performance you're going to get. Can talk about injuries. Yeah, they've got a lot of injuries now, but I don't think the performance last night would have been that different, to be honest, based on what we've seen when other players have been fit this season. So I think there's clearly deeper things going on. I mean, it's interesting what Laurie says about the atmosphere, because I thought actually going into last night, even in the last 15 minutes, United are only a goal down at Old Trafford. And if they were to have turned that round in the last 15 minutes, which isn't an impossible thing against the Bayern team that were comfortable but not brilliant, and then all it would have taken is one goal elsewhere. So it was they were out, but the contest shouldn't have been as dead as it was. I mean, honestly, I fell asleep. The last 20 minutes of that game, I was watching it and I fell asleep. And Monday had been a lot, late night, but nothing was happening. United offered nothing in that last 20 minutes to give any kind of optimism. So, yeah, massively underwhelming again.
Raf, we always talk up Manchester United, Bayern Munich based on that incredible Champions League final many years ago, but huge history between these two clubs. But you look at how Bayern came into this, that huge defeat against Frankfurt. Do you feel like Manchester United, even though it was an away match for Tuchel, was almost like the perfect match for Bayern Munich after what felt like a really bad Bundesliga defeat?
It turned out to be the perfect match because it had a nice balance between stature and sort of reputation, but actual footballing reality being not that impressive and not that frightening. So it felt like a big result, but in the end it was a quite comfortable one. And in that sense, United were a very amenable opponent. There's a word for this in German, Aufbaugegner. It's the kind of opponent that you need when you need to be picked up, when you need to find a bit of confidence. Your go-to 3 points sort of opponent. And a lot of the reviews and reports I read in Germany this morning reflect the fact that, yes, United on paper, Old Trafford on paper were, difficult opponents. And Tuchel said it's always difficult, always uncomfortable at Trafford. But in reality, it was exactly what they needed. A game that felt big, but actually was not all that exerting for them.
What was that word again? Aufbaugegner?
Aufbaugegner.
Aufbaugegner. What would you agree to that, Laurie? Manchester United now becoming Aufbaugegner for other teams. You're the team that people need to play to pick themselves up. I mean, that's kind of odd to hear.
Yeah, well, it sounded like Adam needed a pick-me-up after his Monday night exertion. So, but it turned out it didn't pick him up. Yeah, I mean, it does feel like United have that soft underbelly. You know, they're easy to play against. We've spoken and drilled into the midfield gaps. That, I mean, to be fair, Amrabat I think kind of plugged those fairly well last night. But again, it wasn't like Bayern Munich were, really stretching themselves. They knew they could play within themselves and still probably get the result. They had a couple of chances via the wings, and it could have been a goal for them earlier if a little final moment had gone their way. Yeah, just the fact that United were unable to muster anything. It was one shot on target from Luke Shaw, 20 yards out in the first half, that Manuel Neuer sort of palmed over easily. There was no sort of late rally. But then I think the reason why there was, as Adam's touched on, the jeopardy was still there up until quite late on in the game. But the reality of the situation was Erik Ten Hag was bringing on Facundo Pellistri, Hannibal Mejbri, Kobbie Mainoo as his attempts to try and reconfigure his team and get United some pressure in the final third. We've got one senior goal between them for Manchester United, and that's Hannibal's earlier this season, which was a consolation. So the idea that United were going to suddenly have some scoring potential with these guys on the pitch was just not going to happen with the extensive injury list that they've got. Now you can ask questions about why that is, and also the general harmony around the team and Erik Ten Hag's position and the wider situation of the club, and how much that feeds into it all as well. But it just didn't feel like a proper Champions League night where there was something on the line. There was not really any edge, which actually is kind of in contrast to United's most of their group matches previous to this, where there's been absolute bedlam and there's been goals at all ends and in different ways and late on and comebacks and that kind of stuff. It just was total the opposite of that last night.
Any of you sort of sit there thinking, where's Jadon Sancho right now? Or is that done and dusted?
Rio Ferdinand said, I've not checked this, but Rio Ferdinand said on TNT Sport Discovery Plus that Rio was saying that the last Manchester United forward to score a Premier League goal at Old Trafford is Jadon Sancho. Wow. Is that right, Laurie?
Well, Højlund has scored in the Champions League at Old Trafford, hasn't he, against Galatasaray? So, yeah, I don't know, maybe in the league? I would have to check that. You've put me on the spot there.
Yeah, I mean, incredible.
It seems mad.
True, that's quite incredible.
Yeah.
We're talking about players as well who've been sort of in and out of the squad. Varane, what are your thoughts on his appointment for what was an incredibly important game for someone with that kind of experience?
Well, I mean, he's not played for 6 weeks. He's not started a game for 6 weeks. And we've kind of been given different reasons during that time as to why he's not been playing. We've been told that there's been injury issues, that there's been illness. There's also been selection choices. So the day that he didn't start the Manchester derby, Johnny Evans started that game. And I think Ten Hag afterwards was talking about liking sort of having left-sided centre-halves and viewing Evans as a better option because of passing angles and playing out from the back. So you think, okay, if you take that at face value. And then last night, Varane starts alongside Maguire. So that was after, over the last few weeks, you've had Evans play ahead of him, Lindelof play ahead of him, Luke Shaw play ahead of him. Last night, he put Maguire and Varane together, which he's always sort of been quite reluctant to do. But then Maguire got injured, and Varane had started the game as the left-sided centre-half because Maguire's now first choice on the right side. And Evans came on. So if it was consistent with what Ten Hag's been saying, Evans should have been the left-sided centre-back, right? Based on what he's been saying over the last few weeks. And Varane moves to the right. But then he kept Varane as the left-sided centre-half and put Johnny Evans on the right. So that seemed a bit strange. The only thing I can think, I don't know if he was asked about this after the game in his press conference, the only thing I can think is that there was something specific about Bayern Munich that Varane might have been assigned to do last night that he just wanted to keep the consistency of during the game. But he certainly didn't look... I thought he was one of United's better performers on the night. And he didn't look to me as though he was someone incapable of playing left-sided centre-half where... I'm sure he must have played there for Real Madrid lots of times over the years. It just seems a really odd situation. It very much gives the impression that there's been far more to it behind the scenes, whether it's just concerns over his durability and ability to play regularly and how reliable he can be. But also, I think there seems to have been a little bit of a falling out as well.
It felt a little bit as if Ten Hag had raised the white flag before the game by focusing on defence and making sure that United weren't going to get embarrassed, and quite happy to sacrifice any sense of impetus, any sense of adventure and committing men forward at the expense of just staying very disciplined. And in terms of discipline, I think Amrabat and McTominay probably had one of their best games together, and Varane is somebody who benefits from that protection in front of him. He's not good 1v1. He's good when he has people in front of him, when he can marshal them, when he can organise things. And United defensively looked pretty solid. But of course, it was a must-win game for them. And it felt more like a must-not-lose-heavy game for Ten Hag in terms of the setup and the way they conducted themselves throughout the night.
Laurie, was there any explanation for why he played Varane at all from his post-match presser at all?
Not post-match, but pre-game, because the post-match was quite quick. We only got 5 questions, I think, and they focused more on the general themes around the club and United's future and his own future to a degree. But no, in terms of Varane, he said before the game that he wanted, a kind of defence-focused back line, which is kind of what Raf's alluding to, I guess, there. And it is interesting. And Adam's right on all the points he touches on. I think also perhaps a bit of emphasis should go on his fitness record. He came into United with issues around his knees, and that's been, there's been moments where he's been able to get a run of games together, and people that know him would say that he needs that rhythm to really play at his best. But I think Ten Hag perhaps got to a point where he felt that he wasn't producing the kind of proactive defence that he wants, which weirdly enough, because Johnny Evans is 5 years older than him, he actually does do pretty well. And Maguire more recently has obviously come into his own in that regard. I think he had another good game, Maguire, before he was forced off with a groin injury. And it's interesting to see whether him or Shaw will be able to be back for the Liverpool game, because United are right down to the bare bones now for that one. But I think the Varane thing is a really interesting sort of dynamic, given his pedigree and given sort of how important he was last season, really, for Erik Ten Hag. He was part of this sort of important triangle of Martinez, Varane and Casemiro, which is what Ten Hag felt that he found success on. And all of them have been absent this season. That triangle's been totally gone. So he would perhaps point to that as being one of the main reasons for United's troubles this season.
Raf, I wonder if we could just zoom out here and look at Manchester United through European goggles coming into the Champions League, especially from a German perspective. You see that draw in the Champions League. Do you think Bayern still saw United as this big European force, or did they believe that, based on the team that they had this season, that actually those Manchester United matches should be within their grasp?
I took them seriously because United have individual players that can hurt you. I mean, you saw the amount of goals that they have scored in this group, and it probably should have been enough to qualify quite comfortably. It's defensively that's been the real problem. And even in Munich at the 4-3, United suggested that there is something there, that if only more balance were to be found, they can score goals against big sides. But by the time they arrived at Old Trafford, I think the United in crisis mode had kind of changed the dimension of the game from a Bayern point of view. Also the amount of injuries and Bayern's own issues going into the game, which kind of sharpened their focus and really made them put a bit of extra effort in, even if it didn't perhaps translate into free-flowing football. But in terms of organization, a defensive structure, part of the reason why the game didn't produce many big moments was because Bayern themselves were very much preoccupied with being solid at the back, because they were so shambolic in that 5-1 defeat against Frankfurt on Saturday. But I would say that they did take United seriously enough. It's just that the United are not at the cutting edge of European football at the moment, nor of domestic football, and that's just a reality that I think everyone accepts. The question mark for me is, how come the progress that we all saw last season, how come they seem to have been unable to move on from that and move further into the right direction, and instead have gone backwards, not just 1 or 2 steps, but almost all the way back to where they were 2-3 years ago. That's how it feels at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, and Raf's completely right, and there's so many reasons you can talk about with that. I think, injuries have played a part. I think Ten Hag's relationship with certain players has played a part. Some players just not having consistency. It's very difficult to adequately explain how Marcus Rashford can go from what he was doing last season to what he's become over the past 2 or 3 months, complete shadow of himself. And then you have sort of all these issues with recruitment that we've spoken about forever. You've got the issues with the ownership that we've spoken about forever. I felt sorry last night for Rasmus Højlund, playing up front in that team. You have this kid who's been signed at the age of 20
to rescue United's forward.
Yeah, but
issues.
You see, and it's the obvious comparison to make. But look at the number 9 on the other team, right? Who is so much of a finished article that a top club should really have. And I'm not saying I think Højlund's probably a good signing for Manchester United as a football club if you look at it from a long lens point of view, but probably a really bad signing for Erik Ten Hag's second season as the main striker. So it can be both those things at the same time. I mean, last night he looked like, I don't know, like an underage guy trying to get into a bar up against 2 nightclub bouncers, right, with Upamecano and Kim, who were just all over him, right? And he couldn't. And most forwards would struggle against them because they're powerful, they're fast. So those weapons that Højlund
also
has,
incredibly experienced as well,
and experienced. Upamecano's played World Cup finals, so. And it's not only that, he doesn't have support. He doesn't have players running beyond him. He doesn't have wide players that run inside that cause real problems between the centre-backs and the left-backs. So he's being asked to do a really difficult thing. And then the other problem I think United have tactically on the ball is they don't keep the ball in the opponent's half of the pitch for very long. So they don't sustain attacks in the way that you see Liverpool or Arsenal or Man City do that. So therefore it becomes really hard actually to create chances for your centre-forward because you're really purely relying on counter-attacks to get in behind. But if the guys you're up against are fast and strong and can bully you a bit, then I don't know how he's meant to succeed in the systems that they currently have.
Yeah, well, let's move on to the manager himself. And I mean, based on recent results, many people would be thinking it's his job on the line. But as our colleague Dan Sheldon's written about, it's actually quite complicated in sacking Erik Ten Hag at this moment in time. Laurie, I mean, look, potential Ineos sort of 25% stake in the club are arriving. Fans might be thinking, do you know what? Sir Jim Ratcliffe comes in, first on the list might be Ten Hag, but that's not the case.
No, and I keep having to stop myself from calling it a takeover. I mean, I suppose it's a takeover of sorts if it goes through as we expect, in that they have authority on sporting decisions. But yeah, 25%, still be the Glazers that actually, own the majority. But the Ineos investment, as we, it's been imminent for, several weeks now, really. So I'm always loath to kind of put a timeline on it. But we all the indications are that it is progressing. But their focus, from what we hear, is not going to be on Ten Hag. They don't view him as the main issue at United to resolve. They look at the structure of the club, the sporting director, the football director John Murtagh, and the recruitment side of things as needing attention. And so, and that makes sense really, because if you want to have a look at that first, which I absolutely endorse, then the manager follows from that. You can't sort of appoint the manager and then go after the sort of technical director, sporting director. That's not really how clubs should function. So they're looking at that situation, and that's why Ten Hag's position as it stands isn't under threat, because you've got these guys coming in that have got their own ideas. Nobody at the club at the moment has the authority to make a call on Ten Hag, because they themselves don't know if they'll have jobs in the same way after the Ineos investment goes through. So, football director John Murtagh, I think it's not for sure that he'll be changed in terms of his role, but I think that's something that Ineos are investigating. They're looking at sporting directors and sort of recruitment specialists. You've got an interim chief executive in Patrick Stewart, who is taking over from Richard Arnold, as the job title says, on a temporary basis. So they're not going to sort of pull the trigger on such a major decision like this. And then also sort of beyond that, John Murtagh is absolutely aligned to Ten Hag in the sense that he appointed Ralph Rangnick as an interim manager in his sort of first major decision in the role, and that sort of went disastrously. Obviously Rangnick had issues himself, but also there was I think Murtagh sort of distanced himself from that decision sort of fairly quickly when he saw that it wasn't going to end in a sort of fruitful sort of period. So he then brought in Erik Ten Hag. He has to have Erik Ten Hag be a success, otherwise the spotlight will firmly fall on him. So that's why there's no real appetite at the moment to shift on Erik Ten Hag, even though the record as it stands in normal circumstances, that would be a prime among people's thoughts. I think just as just finally wider on that as well, I think fans, the sort of instinct for them to see another managerial change is sort of held back by the fact that they've seen this before. It's been a rinse and repeat cycle, and I think they would like a manager to be in place beyond players that are potentially having issues with performing what he wants, or even actively kicking back against it. So there's not that swell of public opinion where people are saying the manager needs to go.
I think this structural inertia that Laurie has described is sort of the biggest advantage that Ten Hag has at the moment. There doesn't seem to be the right conditions in place to change him. At the same time, with Ineos taking a close look at how things are, and I'm sure weighing up their ideas for when they take over fully in terms of the sporting decision-making process, it feels to me that Ten Hag is now entering a belated period of probation. If they don't feel that he has really taken this team forward in the next 2, 3, 4 months, I think that when it comes towards making plans for next season, there could still be a massive question mark over his head as well. Because I think he needs to convince everyone that the decision he's made so far, both in terms of how he sets up the team, but also the recruitment that he's heavily influenced, are leading United in the right direction. And I would suggest the way this season has gone, where we all expected more progress, it doesn't really breed much confidence, I think, and assuredness that handing him more money and having him influence more of the transfer policy going forward is necessarily going to deliver decent results. He's made himself quite cleverly hard to dispose of by buying so many players, because Ineos also have to weigh up the fact that if they make a change, they will be stuck with lots of Ten Hag players that I'm sure very few managers going into the Man United job will be quite as fond of as he is. And I'm thinking of Eriksen or, of course, Antony, the €95 million buy. So that makes it harder to have a whole change. But if Ineos feel that what they have at the moment is unlikely to work in the long run, I don't see them having much qualms about making a change when the spring arrives, and that's not that far away.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Raph. I think it's almost like there's three things that go in Ten Hag's favour. So the first is you've got this takeover kind of thing that's happening. So the normal temptation is you go in, you have a look at what's going on in the club, then you make a decision maybe in the summer, give yourself that space. The second is, as Raph says, he's bought so many players that it's almost made him more powerful, because they've given him so much power that you almost have to see if he can make it work, because no other mug's going to come in and take them on, right? That's the way you feel with it at the moment. And then the other argument is, you kind of look at the pattern of Man United over the last 10 years. Well, they've sacked this manager, they've sacked that manager. It can't always be the manager, it must be the players. That's how the argument kind of goes. So again, it's like, I think that gives him a little bit more power in the kind of, if you look at like the popular narratives that are going round. The only thing I would think is because there is potentially this 5th Champions League place this season. So I think in an ordinary season, you'd almost start to look at Man United and think they're just not going to finish 4th. And I don't think Manchester United will finish 4th. But I think they might finish 5th. And if Ineos were to come in and it's kind of early January and they think we might be able to finish 5th, but not by keeping the manager because of the way that relationships are being torched around the dressing room at the moment, and that relationship doesn't seem good. And there is this sort of time because they're completely out of Europe now, there is this time on the training ground for a new manager potentially to get a real reaction. You could also say there's more time on the training ground for Ten Hag in the second half of the season. So that's the only thing I could think, because Champions League qualification is so important for Man United, not just from a reputation and prestige point of view, but Ineos can only really reshape Manchester United's squad if they have the revenues that come from being in the Champions League. You know, they are really on the line with FFP, which is another advantage for Ten Hag because it's going to cost money to get rid of him and get rid of his staff. Now, what I don't know is whether there's any sort of conditions in his contract that if you fall out of Europe and you're not in the Champions League places, that may reduce in some way. I don't know, but that wouldn't be completely unusual. So I think there's probably 80% of the things we're talking about help Ten Hag, but it's not really because of anything he's doing. It's all kind of external factors that are playing in for him.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw it, but there was a reporter at the end of the game last night basically said, Copenhagen's budget is like 20th of, Manchester United's, and they've qualified in second place. And you talk about the players: Højlund, Casemiro, Mount, Martinez, Onana, Malacia, Bayindir, Anthony. It's over 450 odd million, euros worth of player. FC Copenhagen have moved on like 20th of the budget of Manchester United. Like, how can you justify that kind of spending with a manager that's historically or looks like, a world beater, but we've just not seen it. I mean, that's not good business.
No, and it's also, it's an embarrassing Champions League campaign. For United to finish bottom of that group and win, one game that they barely deserved, it took a penalty save in the last minute. Yes, you can talk about United have scored lots of goals, but actually, if you go game by game, the Bayern Munich away game should have been 4-1. It wasn't a 4-3 one margin game. Last night, if Bayern could be bothered, it would have been more. And then the 2 away games, they're so sloppy. And they can't respond to sort of the most basic setbacks. A goal against them becomes 2 against them, becomes a red card, becomes penalties given away. And I struggle to have very little sympathy at all, really, actually, with United in this Champions League campaign. I don't think they've been unlucky. Actually, I think they've just been really incompetent in this group stage and in the way that they've managed games. If you compare it to, you look at the way Bayern managed games, Real Madrid managed games, Arsenal. Arsenal hadn't been in the Champions League for a long time, and they've just been plain sailing. They've not played better teams than Man United have played. So there are psychological challenges that the players are struggling with. There is tactical deficiencies, and I think, as you say, with the signings, there's technical deficiencies as well.
I think Ten Hag is a good coach, perhaps even a very good coach, but I don't think he's a very good manager. And handing him the reins to the transfer dealings, I think, has set United back, because there is still a lot of players that are probably not at United's standard, the way that United perceive themselves, and will never be. But in order to phase them out, and in order to really change, you need players to come in who are definitely better. And not enough of them have arrived. There's still so many question marks over these players. The ones who have come who look good are young and will not have the consistency, the experience, the kind of stature and personality to perform at the highest level now every single week or 2 times a week. They need a lot more time. So for a club that was trying to reinvent itself, you look at the transfer policy and it was just a total disaster, really. And I think that's where the biggest problem with Ten Hag is. I think he's one of those coaches who is very good at coaching, but doesn't necessarily know who the best right back is that United can get at this moment in time in the market. So he chooses players that he's worked with or has seen himself. and that is a very small pond within to fish or to find useful stuff in. You should cast the net much wider with specialized people who have lists of players that they feel are the best in their positions. None of them, or very, very few of them, play at United. If you think, who are the best strikers in the world, who are the best central midfielders in the world, who are the best centre-backs in the world, I don't think you can name any United player in any of those, and that should not be the case.
That's a failure of Manchester United, though, as much as it is Erik Ten Hag. I accept Ten Hag has great agency at United in terms of the players that they've gone after. He doesn't have agency, to my mind, over the amount of money that they spend getting these players. So when you hear about, the £450 million of spending, yes, he's... Oh, I've missed that one. Oh, okay. I see what you're saying there. But I think that in terms of the spend of £450 million, that lands at United's door. That lands at John Murtaugh's door, because he's the one in there signing off on these fees. And yeah, Ten Hag is pushing behind the scenes for different players, but he wanted Frenkie de Jong as his number 6 and ended up with Casemiro, who, yeah, very good player, but, at the end of his career, you'd say, had a good season, but we perhaps predicted that it would tail off in season 2, 3. And that was only a panic buy after they'd lost the first 2 games of the season. Antony, same thing. By that point, we interviewed Edwin van der Sar, and he said that he was challenging United to go higher for Antony. They had them over a barrel, and that is just poor planning and poor management. And so that obviously, Erik Ten Hag is absolutely a part of that. But I think that just the wider structure of United is the real issue, where why aren't they recommending different alternative players in different positions? Jurgen Klopp didn't necessarily want Mohamed Salah, but that was his recruitment department that said, no, this is trust in this guy and we'll bring him in. And he's obviously done incredible work, and obviously Klopp also has his own players that he will push for, and I think Darwin Núñez is a case in point on that one. But there needs to be this kind of balance between the two. And it is a system that John Murtaugh set up. He was charged with revamping United's recruitment system after Sir Alex Ferguson left, and took a lot of the secrets with him in his own mind. Ed Woodward tasked Murtaugh with rebuilding it from scratch, kind of. He hired Steve Brown from Everton to be head of recruitment, and they, Project Bethlehem, they called it, and they've now got 140 scouts worldwide, and a massive database called Trackerman, which is their own creation, and they'll have reports on every single player across the world. The issue is, are they listened to, the scouts, and who takes the decisive action, and when do they strike, and can they actually get deals done for good value? Because clearly, in the last couple of years, beyond that hasn't been the case.
Talk about money spent on players, now exit from the Champions League, can't even consolidate that with the Europa League. Not looking likely that the Premier League's going to come anytime soon. Can they afford to sack Ten Hag? Because if you think about the Mourinho time, they were still paying off his team until very recently.
Yeah, and look, they've taken out this kind of credit facility that there's not that much left on that. The cash reserves are getting pretty low. They have to hit their cycle with financial fair play, so they certainly wouldn't choose to be laying out even more money to sack a manager. And that's why I said I think that gives him a certain amount of time. Equally, sometimes it just becomes unsustainable and irretrievable, and you kind of have to take the hit, almost pay now, think later about how you're going to sort this out. Maybe you sell someone. United's financial situation is really bad, really, really bad. In terms of how much leeway they have, and much of that can't really be solved by actually an investor coming in. They can do a little bit, but they still have to be within reason of their revenues, and that's why the Champions League or even Europa League is important. And it's why you'll get some kind of more football people saying second half of the season you'll have players fit, you'll have a bit more space in the calendar, and what it might do is help them actually get into next season's Champions League, which is probably, if you're doing a kind of a net thing, more important than staying in the Europa League this season. But would you bet on them at the moment to make sure they're 4th or 5th ahead of Aston Villa and Tottenham? And it's a really interesting one because it could define a lot about actually what Ineos are able to do, even next summer and the summer after that.
Anything in January? I mean, loan deals. I mean, you look at the Sabitzer and
January. I mean, this is another when people who have covered Manchester United, it's almost like fatigue, right, of talking about this stuff. But like one of the major stories that we've heard so many times over the past decade is how long it can take for things to happen. I've said it before, like by the time Jadon Sancho arrived at Manchester United, it was like a shrug of the shoulders because they'd spent years, literally years, trying to get him and saying they were going to get him. So when he comes, it's like, who's next? And with this Ineos investment, it's taken over a year since the strategic review started, and it's really poor that it's going to. By the time they actually get through the door, by the time it's confirmed, we think it'll be next week, so just before Christmas. But they're not going to be able to do anything in January because there'll be regulatory processes involved. So January-wise, I don't think they can do very much at all, even though they're having a few meetings now, I think, behind the scenes. But because of the FFP situation, I think the best United will be able to do is if they can get a Martial out or a Varane out, or I mean, there's not that many other players you can really afford to lose in January. And then even then you're looking at cheap or loan options in the market. So I wouldn't expect kind of revolutionary stuff from Man United in January.
Raf, looking at, that possible fifth place in next season's Champions League, and Adam's alluded to it a fair bit, but from what we understand, England are sort of third in place for that fifth place in the Champions League. Are we pinning our hopes on Newcastle to do the business, to make sure that Manchester United or someone, whoever comes in fifth next season, can get a place in the Champions League?
Well, United certainly have to hope that the other English clubs, including their beloved neighbours, Man City, continue to do really well to help them, giving them a bit more leeway. But of course, yes, playing the Europa League takes a lot of time and a lot of games, but I think it would have been a useful way of also possibly qualifying for the Champions League and winning a trophy. They would have been, even with all their flaws, I think among the favourites, or at least certainly among the contenders to lift that trophy. But there's just one more thought that I had about Ten Hag and his future. I think last year he benefited from the sense that United really supported him to the hilt. It was very clear that he was going to be indulged in terms of the transfer market. It was very clear that whatever he said in terms of who he wanted in and out of the squad, I'm thinking of Ronaldo, for example, was gospel. And I think that carried over into this season, but now with Ineos coming in, I think it's not a total coincidence that the first briefings against Ten Hag have arrived now, because I think there is a sense that perhaps he isn't quite as safe and that perhaps briefing against him is not going to have huge repercussions, because who knows if he's going to be there in 6 months or so. So whenever you sense weakness, whenever there's a sense that there is not going to be a strong comeback, that the club, however you define it, are not going to back the manager to the hilt against players who are briefing and feel that they can do so with a certain amount of liberty, that's when things happen. And I think that's a dangerous moment, again, for him to be in, because I can see that process accelerating. The more United play badly, the more the self-preservation instinct to point the finger at the coach will kick in, and we'll see more and more stories about him being stubborn and being very Dutch, and being all those things that worked in his favour last year will be constructed as being counterproductive this season.
Yeah, I mean, just before we move on to the Liverpool match, I'm coming to you on that one. I don't know where you're at Anfield. Laurie, if that position does become untenable, are there even any conversations around possible names that can be thrown into that hat right now that people are looking at? Because we were talking about this before we started the pod with Adam. I mean, I can't imagine anyone big enough or interesting enough out there. There are a lot of managers still, don't get me wrong, but to solve this problem in the short term at least?
Well, that is the other element to it. When Adam was making his list of reasons why, Ten Hag, it's not the kind of expected thing that Ten Hag, is going to lose his job or is under pressure. It's in the end game. Is because who do United bring in? That's always been the question, really. Obviously they had to rely on an interim after they sacked the last guy, the last permanent manager.
Previously.
So
yeah. So before, when they sacked Jose, it was interim as well. So the 2 times they've done it mid-season, they've gone interim.
Yeah. And so, I mean, but then you also look at, Roberto De Zerbi, everyone thinks that maybe he's going to take over from Pep Guardiola at Man City. He looks like a really promising manager in the Premier League, attacking football, interesting. But his pedigree isn't as good as Ten Hag's was when Ten Hag came into the building. United, I do feel like they need a figure that can get hold of the dressing room. You've had the kind of figure in Ole Gunnar Solskjaer who has perhaps been more lenient, I would say, with players, more on their level. That ended up getting him out the door. The players seem to be kicking back against Ten Hag's disciplinary streak and kind of authoritarian take on things. But I do feel like that is going to be an issue for whatever manager comes into the building, because it's such a huge club, so much focus. As Raf's alluded to, you have these elements that are then competing against each other. I've no doubt that there's players that are on the pitch that are thinking of themselves in certain moments, just because that's a natural instinct when you think, well, if I make a mistake here, I'm going to get a huge amount of scrutiny, and I don't actually want that to be the case right now. So it's difficult to get that kind of team unity and togetherness, I think, in this situation. Now, I'm not saying that there's nobody that could do a better job than Erik Ten Hag at all, but I wouldn't necessarily trust at the moment the people in position to make that call, or even, in terms of Ineos, Sir Dave Brailsford, I think, who is going to have the kind of sporting control. His record at Nice, you can have a look at and wonder, has that gone to plan so far? So it's such a difficult call to make, who then to bring into the club, aside from just going, okay, this isn't working, this hasn't got any future left, and getting rid of the current manager.
I love Laurie's words there: team unity and togetherness. Man United lost 3-0 at Old Trafford to Bournemouth. Bayern Munich straight after that lost at Old Trafford. Liverpool next away at Anfield. And then you've got West Ham away. Mm-hmm. And then Aston Villa at home. Team unity and togetherness. How on earth do you get that ready for what looks like 3 insane fixtures?
Yeah, but you could almost put any 3 fixtures in the Premier League there.
Do you think so?
Right?
Anyone?
Well, apart from the bottom 3, you don't trust Man United at the moment to necessarily go and beat teams in a convincing way. Liverpool clearly is, an intimidating fixture, I think, particularly now with the injury list as well. I don't think it almost already feels like damage limitation, right? You go there and you think, take 6-0 after last year. But no, I struggle to see how Man United win that game. I mean, they've scored 1 goal at Anfield in 8 years, in any case. So there is clearly a psychological block that United have experienced there. It's interesting because there used to be a pattern that kind of whichever team was up between United or Liverpool over the years would ordinarily be the other team that would give you a bloody nose, because almost that pride and that rivalry and derby fever would kind of set in. Whereas this kind of recent version of Man United just wilts at Anfield. I mean, it was 7-0 last year. Was it 4 the year before when Ralph Rangnick was manager? Obviously 5-0 at Old Trafford when Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was manager. So there are scars there. United know what Liverpool can do. Liverpool are scoring goals. They're not playing brilliantly,
but they weren't even in their best last season. If you think about it.
I mean, that was also, I maintain, that was a very weird game. Right? It was 0-0 at half time.
Yeah.
And United were arguably the better team in the first half, and then somehow lost the game 7-0. And I don't really think United have recovered from that moment on. Like, actually, they've not played well very often since then. So it clearly had some impact on the dressing room, as you would understand. Liverpool opening a bit of a new stand, I think, as well on Sunday. So the atmosphere should be good. And I think Liverpool fans will be going there expecting a party, right? That's the way they'll be feeling. United fans will be travelling with a bit of sense of dread. And then you look at, what's Man United's likely defence and midfield on Sunday? What, Wan-Bissaka, Evans, Varane, Dalot, midfield, McTominay, Amrabat, Mainu. I mean, that is a tough situation. So it might help United in that you would think Ten Hag will just go there and camp, a bit like they did last night, and that should at least limit the damage to a certain extent. But that's a pretty emasculating state for a club the size of Man United with that budget to be in.
Let's leave it there, Adam, Laurie, and also Rafa as well. Thanks so much for your time.
If you like this video, click subscribe for more content like this. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season to bring you the inside track to the biggest stories in football. If you'd like to listen to the full episodes for free, search the Athletic Football Podcast wherever you get your podcasts from.